Chapter 1. Origins of the Money Power in America. Justice, full and ample justice, to every portion of the United States should be the ruling principle of every freeman and should guide the deliberations of every public body, whether it be state or national, said Andrew Jackson. During the existence of the human race, from the earliest dawn of civilization to the close of the present century, the power exercised over the industry, property, and conscience of man by cunning and ambition has assumed many forms. The form of power which first appeared to oppress and plunder the race was exemplified in those celebrated conquerors of antiquity who traversed the earth in their bloody careers, transforming blooming fields and rich and populous cities into deserts, overthrowing whole nations, sacrificing on the battle fields countless myriads of their fellow men, merely satisfy a species of madness dignified by the name of ambition. Another and a more dangerous form of misapplied power resulted from the intellectual tyranny exercised by that shrewd class, the priesthood, over the conscience and religious beliefs of the great mass of mankind. From the days of the pharaohs down to this period, man, from his instinctive veneration for a supreme being, has been so peculiarly susceptible to the arts, wiles, and cunning of priestcraft to such a degree as to excite universal surprise. Those gross superstitions engrafted on the inherent religious nature of man by that wary intellectual superiority which weighed down the noblest traits of the human mind, which bred bitter religious animosities, unheard of extortions by the corrupt and infamous priestly aristocracies of various so-called religions, were the well-matured and craftily devised schemes for plunder by designing men. It is almost inconceivable that the ancient Egyptians, that admirable race whose noble genius and wonderful energy reared those stately temples, the magnificent cities, and the stupendous pyramids along the valley of the Nile, should worship the man-eating crocodile, the savage vulture, the grinning ape, and the crawling lizard. This race is an example of that soul-darkening superstition which hung like end-pall over the intellect of man. The countless wars which afflicted Europe, Asia, and Africa for nearly 18 centuries, which drowned the finest aspirations of humanity in blood, which desolated the fairest parts of the earth, which stemmed the tide toward a higher and a grander civilization, sprang from the base superstitions originated by the grasping priesthood who lived in sloth and luxury upon the labor of the deluded mass of mankind. The celebrated Vattel, in the 12th chapter of that noble work, The Law of Nations, awards us a faint idea of the enormities practiced upon the people of Europe by the clergy. Taine, in his History of France, shows that the ecclesiastics had seized upon the most valuable and fertile portion of the territory of that country, and that the oppression practiced by them upon the French people was one of the leading causes of the Great Revolution. The third and most insidious and most dangerous form of power that has yet appeared to threaten the material well-being of the race, which now holds every civilized and semi-civilized people in its merciless grasp, which is appropriating to itself the productive energies of the world, which is subordinating the press, the pulpit, and the statesmen of the day to its ambitious ends, which openly boasts of its nefarious methods in the courts, legislatures, and other parliamentary bodies of nations, is the modern money power. That there is a gigantic combination of the money dealers, a powerful international trust of usurers, asserting a superiority above all jurisdictions, and having for its servants the so-called statesmen and potentates of various nations, who willingly register the decrees of this money power upon the statute books of the respective states, is a fact that can be sustained by irrefutable evidence. This great international monetary trust now menaces the very life of this nation, and the people must dethrone it and subordinate it to their will, or American liberty will vanish. The Declaration of Independence, which announced the true principles of government, was a memorable protest against the rapacious money power composed of the landed aristocracy, the trading, commercial, and manufacturing interests of England, which, by a long series of vicious and unconstitutional acts of Parliament, sought to eat out the substance of the colonists. The War of the Revolution, which followed, set its seal of approval upon the patriotic efforts of the colonists against oppression, and freedom was achieved. Upon the conclusion of that most righteous conflict, and more perfect union was formed to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for themselves and posterity by the adoption of the federal Constitution. General Washington was chosen the first president by a unanimous vote. For his constitutional advisors, he appointed Thomas Jefferson for Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton for Secretary of the Treasury, James Knox for Secretary of War, and Edmund Randolph for Attorney General. Jefferson, who was the most accomplished scholar in America, the profoundest thinker upon the principles of government of any age, the friend of humanity, and a staunch believer in the capacity of the common people for self-government, was a representative of that industrial element which sustained society by its labors. Hamilton, who was an aristocrat by birth and breeding, and who was connected by marriage with the wealthiest family of the landed aristocracy of New York, was a strong representative of the trading, banking, and commercial element of New York City and New England, which constituted the Tory Clement of the Revolution. The presence of two statesmen of such wholly antagonistic views and temperaments in the cabinet of Washington naturally originated divisions of political sentiment from which sprang two great political parties. One of the first measures which received the aid and sanction of Hamilton was the Act of Congress adopted February 25, 1791, chartering the Bank of the United States. Jefferson, whose penetrating mind perceived the vast power for mischief lodged in an institution of that nature, in a powerful communication to the president, advised him to veto the bill. Washington, however, accepted the views of Hamilton, his Secretary of the Treasury, and signed the bill, and it became a law. By the terms of the act incorporating the bank, its capital was fixed at $10 million. The power to issue its circulating notes as money having full legal tender quality for the payment of taxes and demands due, the government was conferred upon it. It was made the depositary of the revenues of the government, and therefore it became the fiscal agent of the Treasury Department. It was chartered for the period of 20 years. For the extensive powers and exclusive privileges bestowed upon it by Congress, the bank paid the United States a small bonus. This bank, therefore, was a monopoly sustained by the credit and the revenues of the United States. It had the solo power of issuing legal tender paper money, and its actual capital was trebled in its earning capacity by loaning its circulating notes at interest and by having the control of the government revenues. This was the first appearance of an organized money power in the United States. Thomas Jefferson, by voice and pen, in language of rare power and felicity, pointed out the dangerous possibilities of the bank to influence the politics and business of the nation. In a letter to Madison in 1793, Jefferson stated that the bank party consisted of the fashionable circles of Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and Charleston, natural aristocrats, merchants trading in British capital, papermen. Against the bank were 1, merchants trading on their own capital, Irish merchants, 3, tradesmen, mechanics, farmers, and every other possible description of our citizens. In 1811, Congress refused to recharter the bank, and as it had during its brief career obtained the mastery over the entire business of the country by its loans of circulating notes and the public revenues, and had built up a system of credit in the commercial centers to intimidate Congress and the people, it made a concerted contraction of the currency and brought on the Great Panic of 181. United States Senator Benton, in a speech in the Senate during the administration of Jackson, thus graphically states the manner in which the bank contrived to manufacture public sentiment in its favor. He says, "All the machinery of alarm and distress was in as full activity at that time as at present, and with the same identical effects. Town meetings, memorials, resolutions, deputations to Congress, alarming speeches in Congress. The price of all property was shown to be depressed. Hemp sunk in Philadelphia from $350 to $250 per ton. Flour sunk from $11 per barrel to 7.75. All real estate fell 30%. 500 houses were suspended in their erection. The rent of money rose to 1.5 per month on the best paper. Confidence destroyed. Manufactories stopped, workmen dismissed, and the ruin of the country confidently predicted."